All right. Welcome back, Peter.
Yeah, welcome back. Last one for the year.
Yeah, crazy. 2024, just gone like that.
Yeah.
Should I hit us off with the classic book summary?
Yeah, go for it.
Cool. Okay, so podcast 22, we're going to go through Lessons in Stoicism by John Sellars. So the summary is that in this book, in Lessons in Stoicism by John Sellars, he takes us through some of the core teachings of Stoicism. He focuses on the works of well-known Stoics like Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and in it he covers topics such as what is a philosopher's role in life, what is within our control, and how do we live in community. Ultimately, as the Stoics, Sellars provides practical insights to help us cultivate virtue and lead more meaningful lives. So that's the high-level overview. I don't know if you want to, before we... So we're going to follow the sort of structure that we've been following lately, which is I'll jump through the chapter and then we'll chat through it. But before we start with that, is there anything you want to add in there, Peter?
No, we can go for it.
Cool. Jump right in. All right. So going to the prologue. So I'm going to just read a few of those snippets. So starting on page 1, he says, what if someone told you that much of the suffering in your life was simply due to the way that you think about things? What if someone claimed that they could show you how to avoid all of this? And if they said that these things were in fact the product of the way that you look at the world, or the product of looking at the world, the product of your way of looking at the world being mistaken? These are all claims that we find in the works of the three great Roman Stoics, Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius. Then going on to the next page, they just give a brief introduction of Stoicism and where it came from and that. And the summary there is that Zeno, he was the founder of Stoicism. And the reason it's called Stoicism is because he used to teach under the painted stoa, which I think is like a sort of columns, like in front of fancy houses. It's like these columns and then little roof and stuff. So the painted stoa, so that's where the word Stoics come from. Then jumping onto page 3, the book sort of overview is, we'll explore what we can and cannot control, and how the way that we think about things can generate sometimes harmful emotions. Then we'll think about our relationship with the outside world and our place within it. And we'll conclude by focusing on our relationships with other peoples, which contribute to so much of the both joys and stresses of daily life. So yeah, I think it's a fairly nice overview of the book, because it kind of takes us from like how we think about things to, and how that affects us and all, to how Stoicism actually relates to not just about ourselves, which often, like if you're just reading Stoicism at a cursory glance, you might come to that conclusion, because it's often talking about what I think it's Marcus Aurelius or one of the Stoics called the inner citadel, which is like your inner state and what you have control over and how to act in the world based off of that. But actually we see in this book that it's not just about that. It's also about the idea of how does that impact how we live in the world and we live in community, relations with other people.
Yeah, I think just to add on, it was kind of an interesting take to be like, I think with most books that we've read, it's like kind of dealing with oneself I mean, there have been others whereby, there is those sort of discussion about interacting with communities and stuff. Like, I mean, is it how we think and all those kind of how thoughts are made? There was that whole communal aspect of things.
Jacob.
But usually it's about just dealing with oneself. But here they kind of were like, okay, fine, we've looked at dealing with an individual, but how does this then pan out in communities and stuff? Like, it's not make it as if it's about being selfish and so. So I think that was kind of a good sort of take on things.
Yeah, like a helpful tie back to what are we actually doing this for? Like, why do we even want to be good people in the first place?
Exactly.
So, yeah. Cool. Should we head over to the first chapter? So that was the sort of prologue. And the first chapter is called The Philosopher as Doctor. So I'm going to, again, skim through a bunch of different things and then we can chat about it. So on page 6, he says here, in the Discourses, Epictetus is quite clear about what his role as a philosopher is. The philosopher, he says, is a doctor, and the philosopher's school is a hospital for souls. Then further down, by soul we ought not to assume anything immaterial or immortal or supernatural. Instead, in this context, we should simply understand it as mind, thoughts, and belief. For the Stoics, for Socrates, and later the Stoics, this concern with taking care of one's soul was all the more important because he and they held that the condition of our soul ultimately determines the quality of our lives. It's a very interesting statement. The condition of our soul, or our mind, ultimately determines the quality of our lives. And then further down, in an important argument later taken up by the Stoics, Socrates sought to show that something like great wealth is in a sense worthless. To be more precise, he argued that material wealth is value neutral because it can be used for both good and bad ends. Then carrying on further, a virtuous person can use money to do good things, while a not so virtuous individual might use it to do great harm. And then it shows that the real value, the source of what is good or bad, resides in the character of a person who has money, not the money itself. It also tells us that paying excessive attention to our money and possessions while neglecting the state of our character is a grave mistake. Then on page 9, in everyday language we might say that all these things that benefit us are good, but Zeno, following Socrates, wanted to reserve the word good for an excellent, virtuous character. So instead he said that they have value. This led Zeno to call these things preferred indifference in his technical vocabulary. And then onto the next page, so page 10. But just what does this mean to take care of one's soul? What is involved in having an excellent character? To use a very old-fashioned word, it means to be virtuous. In particular, it means to be wise, just, courageous, and moderate, the four cardinal virtues according to Stoics. This is what it means to have a good character and to be a good human being. And then on page 11, sort of as a summary, the task of the philosopher, conceived as doctor for the soul, is to get us to examine our existing beliefs about what we think is good and bad, what we think will benefit us, and what we think we will need in order to enjoy a good, happy life. According to the Stoics, a good, happy life is one that is in harmony with nature. So yeah, I really, I think that the way that they categorize the word good, being sort of reserved for sort of a truly virtuous character, rather than just using it kind of haphazardly, like we do in some sense. I think it's a helpful distinction, and then to not be like, oh, there's only this good, there's nothing else. But then to say, okay, well, let's assign that word value, and then the term that comes up a lot in Stoicism is preferred indifference. We saw it in previous books like Epictetus and with or his handbook or Enchiridion, and then also with the letters from a Stoic, I think, by Seneca. I can't remember what the title was.
Yeah.
So what do you think of philosopher as a doctor, Peter?
Yeah, so just going back to some of the things, I just want to echo some of the things that I think you read. I think for one is about what determines the quality of our lives, It's essentially the condition of our souls. And I think it's further expanded in the next chapter, but I won't dive much into it. But it's more of we are actually responsible for that. It's in the way we sort of react to things that kind of determines everybody. But they have the whole steps of how we kind of react to things.
Our judgments.
And then another thing that's also quite interesting is the whole thing of that, and it's quite interesting. Like most people, when you kind of ask, like, what's their end going? Oh, what do they working towards? It's like, to acquire a lot of wealth and stuff like that. But it kind of goes to be like having wealth is one thing, like it then doesn't mean that, again, as you said, we use it willy-nilly, like make you a good person. It's how then, like, as you as an individual, as your character is a result of how you then spend that money, and I mean, others use it for good, others not, that's quite interesting, to be like, you look at it on the one side to be like, this is what I want, but the flip side to it is that, I mean, it's just the same as the whole power corrupts thing, It's like, you might want this and others want it for good and others want it for bad, At the end of the day, what determines who you are is, how you act when you find in a position of power, when you find yourself in a position of great wealth.
I think that idea of things being value neutral, like we often view things like money as either being very good or bad, but like you were mentioning, it's more related to the character of the individual wielding the relevant thing than it is about the actual thing itself. It's and like he says, neglecting the state of our character is a grave mistake. If you're just pursuing wealth and money and whatever it might be, even experience, so traveling the world and that, but you're neglecting your character, it's a grave mistake. But I also really like that idea of the philosopher as a doctor, because often we think of philosophers as these like super fancy, clever people that have all of these like thoughts that we can't understand. But in Socrates and I think Aristotle and the Stoics, their view seems to be more along the line of it's a practical thing. It's not some high-minded thing. It's actually like the reason why we would spend time thinking about things and trying to understand ourselves better and other people and how to interact with them, is to I guess refine our souls, make our souls more virtuous, so that then we can can use that practically. Yeah.
I should say, we'll probably get there, but like what you're saying about how we view philosophers and stuff, I think that was the last chapter where it says kind of how we need to live life. That was discussed in the last or second to last chapter. It was that we rob ourselves from living life, right? But then it went on to say that I think it was either Seneca or one of them, what they define as living life is actually, again, like I said, exposing yourself to different philosophies, actually reading history, things in history and whatnot. And I was a bit torn with that, because it's like, how is that really living life? You know?
Yeah.
But again, I think it's I would have preferred the phrase that, like, you need to equip yourself in how to live life by actually taking note of things that have happened in the past and whatnot. I mean, like, kind of like learning from previous mistakes, et cetera, et cetera. But it's just your comment that you made kind of made me think back to that.
Yeah, I think it'll be worthwhile to think about it a bit more. Because I think I agree with you. The Stoics often can, or it seems like they often can tend a bit too much towards the, like, just sit in a bubble and learn things. And that ending phrase does kind of lean towards that. I don't think that it can fully mean what it sounds like, because as they speak about later, how Stoics actually were very heavily involved on purpose in political things, things to do with, I think it's politi, which is like people or something like that, or city, I can't remember, but it's basically
Gender
like dealing with.
was also one of those.
Yeah. And so just dealing with actual day-to-day realities as well. So I think it is a bit of a balance, but they maybe, when speaking about it, lean a bit too much towards the one side. But yeah. Anyway, should we head to the next one?
Yeah.
What do you control? All right, so jumping through again. On page 13, he says here, the handbook of Epictetus opens with a fairly blunt account of what things he thinks are and are not up to us. The things that we can control, the things in our power, include our judgments, impulses, and desires. Pretty much everything else, Epictetus suggests, ultimately is out of our control, including our own bodies, our material possessions, our reputation, and our worldly success. Further down he says, to be more precise, he thinks that all we really have control over are our judgments, which is to say, what we think about things that happen to us. Now, judgments are hugely important because, among other things, they determine how we act. As Epictetus would put it, they control our desires and our impulses. So remember, he says earlier that it's judgments, desires, impulses. But then he sort of clarifies here and he says, well, now our judgments are hugely important because, among other things, they determine how we act. As Epictetus put it, they control our desires and our impulses. So actually, it's only judgment, really. And then he goes on to say, judgments are fundamental and we neglect them at our peril. Then he goes on, the good news, according to Epictetus, is that we have complete control over our judgments, and with some reflection and training, we can soon overcome the tendency to judge things unthinkingly. Then page 18, Epictetus is particularly insistent on the need to focus our attention on the things that are within our control. Forget about the things that you can't control and direct your attention to your judgments, which in turn will improve your character, which is the one thing that will enable you to achieve what Zeno called a smooth flow of life. But one must be vigilant, for if we stop paying attention to our judgments, even for a brief moment, we run the risk of falling back into bad habits. If we let our attention slip, we can quickly lose whatever progress we may have made. So, we need to integrate periods of reflection into our daily lives. And then he goes on to describe how Marcus Aurelius and Seneca and them do this reflecting. And then he concludes, we must keep our key philosophical principles always ready at hand so that we don't fall back into making mistaken judgments. This is philosophy as daily practice and a way of life. So yeah, the way that we make judgments, I guess, is one of the key things, and it influences how we deal with and react to all kinds of other situations. So, and just a reminder that judgments, which is to say what we think about things that happen to us. Yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts there, Peter.
Yeah, no, nothing much. It's just, I think, the whole realization of that there's very little that we control. I think a lot of people fail to grapple with that. You want like a well-tethered life. I don't think planning is bad, but it's just, I think, I don't want to even say investing heavily in those plans, but more like looking at those plans as a sure thing, is creating a lot of room for disappointment. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that was an idea that was also in the previous book about how, like, but yeah, I digress. But yeah, we are responsible as much as we would like to think about in that way, but we are responsible for our own disappointment because we set aside certain expectations, and the moment where those expectations are not met, then we're disappointed. And that's exactly what it's kind of trying to highlight here, to be like, listen, there's really not much you're actually in control of. At the end of the day, you just have to kind of do your best and kind of hope for the best.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just, I think, reminded me, I think, a few years back, I think one thing I'd always tell myself was like, the only thing I can do is actually just try to be the best version of myself on a daily basis. If there's something that's, I feel, was a shortfall the previous day, I try to correct it, going forward. I think that's all you can do, really. As if you look at it in that way, it's like, it sounds sad, but it's just the reality of it. And I think also about the whole moving on about us paying attention to our judgment. I think that's very important. And I think discuss it further in a later chapter, to be like, listen, like, if you want to change something, you should try your best not to put yourself in that situation, because if you're still stuck there, then how are you going to change? So it's like, you should really pay attention. If you've made the judgment that this doesn't serve you anymore, then it's best to then just completely stay away from it.
All right, should we go on to the problem with emotions? Let me get my bearings. Okay, so page 21, he says, what can a man do about his brother's anger? Epictetus, typically to the point, replies, nothing. You can do nothing about it. We cannot control other people's emotions because they fall into the category of things not up to us. But Epictetus doesn't just leave it there. He shifts his attention to what the man can control, namely his own reaction to his brother's anger. Further down on page 22, he says, "The Stoic account of emotions on one level is very easy to understand. The central claim is simply this: our emotions are a product of judgments we make. Consequently, we are in complete control of our emotions and responsible for them." The Stoic claim, and this is an important point, is not that we should deny or repress our emotions. It is rather that we should try to avoid having them in the first place. A second important point is that Stoics don't think that someone can just click their fingers and make an emotion go away. You can't simply turn off an unwanted emotion at will, but what you can do is to avoid letting the next one pick up momentum to the point that it becomes out of control. Then carrying on page 25, contrary to the popular image, Stoics do not suggest that people can or should become unfeeling blocks of stone. All humans will experience what Seneca calls first movements. These are when we are moved by some experience, and we might feel nervous or shocked or excited or scared, or we might even cry. All of these are quite natural reactions. They are physiological responses of the body, but not emotions in the Stoic sense of the word. Further down, to be momentarily scared of something but then remain firm is not an emotion of fear either. For these first movements to become emotions proper would require the mind judging that they are something terrible, or that something terrible has happened, and then acting on that. And then a little bit further he says, there are thus 3 stages to the process Seneca suggests. First, an involuntary first movement, which is a natural physiological reaction out of your control. Second, a judgment in response to that experience, which is within our control. And third, an emotion that once created is out of our control. Once the emotion is there is nothing we can do but wait for it to subside. And then a little bit later, still on page 26, if someone says something critical about you, stop to consider whether what they say is true or false. If it is true, then they have pointed out a fault that you can now address. As such, they have benefited you. If what they say is false, then they are in error, and the one being harmed is them. Either way, you suffer no harm from their critical remarks. But the one way in which their remarks could cause you real and serious harm is if you would let it provoke you into a state of anger. So, yeah, I think it's another helpful way. It's not the way that we would normally think of emotions, where Seneca at least separates it out into this idea of first movements and then this idea of actual emotions. And what I like in the way that they split it out is that it's like involuntary, voluntary, involuntary. So involuntary is our first inclinations, like we feel something, the natural physiological response. That's often what we would actually refer to generally as emotions. Yeah. But then there's that part about our judgment of that situation. And I mean, further in the book and earlier, they talk about how things like anger and things like fear and that are normally responses because we think that something negative has happened. And so a lot of Stoicism is basically counseling one's mind to get to the point where we can say, okay, like, is this thing true or not? And if it is true, okay, well, that's not a harmful thing. That's just a lesson that I can learn. Or if it's not true, okay, well, that's then why should I worry about it? In fact, to the point that it's potentially the one that's saying the untrue thing that is the one that's most harmed. So, yeah, I think another set of very good ways of framing things, in this case, emotions.
I should say, I've been experiencing a lot of that lately, and it's something that I've had, I think, a few conversations around to be like, ever since I've moved, I've met a lot of new people, and there'll be times when someone says something, and then I'll have that moment to be like, and I mean, it can't be negative, but like, it would be like something negative, and then I would be like, actually, no, like, that's not who I am. And you kind of also, I mean, the one added layer of, which I never thought about, but I'm like, okay, that's actually, I didn't look at it, I don't want to think about it in that way, but I guess it is about, like what you said, it's them harming themselves by saying those things. And like, I'm just like, have I gotten to that point where I know myself well enough to be like, okay, that's true, let me work on it. And I think I've been like, okay, that's actually some sense of growth, because I don't think that's how I would react to things previously. But now it's like, when you hear something, you're like, okay, I hear you. Is it really something I need to consider? Yes. Do I need to get provoked by it? No. Like, trying to really limit or reduce the number of being provoked by things that people say. It's either you take it as, criticism but work on it, or rather be like, no, that's not actually who I am, and you kind of move on from there. And again, it just also, I think this just further adds on to the whole, we're really not in control of much, but we need to then be very careful with the things we're in control of. Like you were saying, how he's split it up in three, that when something happens, yes, our natural inclination is to react, and that we completely have no control over, and then we have to then assess to be like, okay, this has happened, then what? And then what we decide, our actions, they create that emotion. And also, like, I think the one thing that was also for me, like, I thought, well, I'm like, okay, that's also, very interesting to be like, whatever emotion has been created, like, you just have to then ride that wave, because like it says that
once it becomes anger, you are basically out of control. And it's I think with people who get like properly angry, I think you and I are fortunate that we don't normally tend towards that side of things. But I think when people get properly angry, you can actually see that there's nothing that you
anymore.
Can do. They almost become like non-human. They just react. But I think, just tying back to that split into three thing, where we have that initial reaction, and then we go to the judgment stage, and then based on that judgment, the emotion forms, or doesn't, and I think that judgment phase normally happens very quickly and almost instinctually. So we almost have this feeling, this reaction, then we judge it to be bad or good, but we judge it to be bad, and then we end up forming anger. And there's like, I'm gonna probably butcher this, but I think there's interesting ways, if one were to think about it more, which I probably won't, but how it ties back to that book, How Emotions Are Made. So the idea of, I think they talk about how, say for example, your wife or husband gets back from home, and you are sitting there waiting for them, and then you say something in a certain way, and maybe one of you is feeling sick or something like that, and then you mix that feeling of sickness, maybe nauseous or something like that, or you mix that feeling with the emotion of relating to this person, and then you start associating being upset with that person. Maybe a more clear example is like if someone hasn't eaten in a while and they're hungry, they can then lash out at people more quickly than they normally would if they had just eaten, because they're not actually taking a second to think about or make the judgment of like, what is this thing that I'm feeling versus the something that happened in the world. They're just kind of bundling them all together and then reacting based on that.
I mean, I sort of brought that up. It's also another example to what you're saying is the whole how the judges preside cases. You know, when they're hungry, they're
exactly
more likely to give a guilty verdict than a not guilty verdict, but because it's like they're there in the court, what they're hearing is making them feel some type of way, but they don't understand that it's actually been compounded with them being hungry. But also on that thought, I think it was the book we read, How We Think, to where, like, you know, when something happens, we kind of react a certain way, but the more we react that way, we create a neural pathway that makes it instant for us to just default to that. And I think with this whole thing, it's also, again, like it said, we have to really pay attention to our judgments, because if you let your guard down, then it's easy for you to just, as your default, get angry. But I think
slip back into that.
Yeah, one way of making sure that doesn't happen is that you're mindful of your judgment. Yes, they might be instant, but again, like it says, that's one thing you have control over. You know, meaning that you can be very mindful of it, that, okay, this has happened. And again, being self-aware and taking account of what has happened in the past, to be like, listen, this happened, I reacted this way, but it wasn't great. Maybe let me try to do something differently. But yes, I mean, it's easier said than done, because in most cases, like you say, it's instantaneous. You just usually, and again, like I said, with the neural pathway thing, that the more, it's like a path in the grass. The more you've walked over that path, it's your default setting. So once you're faced with that situation, you react in that way.
Yeah, and I think that idea of reflecting on it is critical, because as with habits or anything, you need to reinforce them, and it's very easy to slip back into those bad habits or bad ways of thinking. And so that's why we see the Stoics doing things like Marcus taking his morning meditations and reflecting on things, and different Stoics having different practices, and I think that most likely, based on the very limited stuff that I've read, it seems like a lot of the people that do very well in life and are very well composed often have some form of reflection. Normally it's in the form of writing. It doesn't have to be I think it's just a useful thing, because it slows you down. It gets you to actually purposefully think about things. But have some sort of a practice like that forces them to reflect back on at least weekly, but often daily. And in Epictetus's case, he's like, you just need to do it 24/7. But I think a daily is a nice, like in the morning or in the evening is a good thing to it's kind of like a cheesy idea of of thinking of the positive things that have happened and stuff. Similar idea to like reinforcing those neural pathways to be like that's your new default setting, rather than having the whatever it is, anger or something, be your default setting. Yeah. Okay, should we head on to dealing with adversity?
Yeah.
All right, so let's see, where did I make my first note? Okay, page 31. So he says, yeah, and this is Seneca. So, it's Sellars talking about Seneca. So in Seneca's essay on providence, he focuses on the question of why it is that people suffer so much misfortune. Seneca responds to this from a number of different directions. First, he insists that nothing bad ever really happens, given that all external events are neither good nor bad in themselves. Someone who keeps this idea in their mind and doesn't rush hastily to judgment will simply accept what happens for what it is, without judging that something terrible has occurred. Seneca goes further. Not only does he think that we ought to not see apparent misfortunes as genuinely bad, he also thinks that we ought to welcome them as things that can benefit us. The good person, he says, treats all adversity as a training exercise. Then going on to page 32. Conversely, excessive good fortune is in fact really bad for us. When are we ever tested if we never really experience any difficulties? How will we ever develop the virtues of patience, courage, or resilience if everything always goes well? There is no worse luck, Seneca says, than unending luxury and wealth, which will serve only to make us lazy, complacent, ungrateful, and greedy for more. This is real misfortune. By contrast, whatever adversity life throws at us will always be an opportunity to learn something about ourselves and improve our characters. Then on page 34, Seneca, he says here, the language that he uses in On Providence can sometimes make it sound as if he relished the fight, ready to welcome the next onslaught for benefits that he could take from it. But in one of his letters to a friend Lucilius, he strikes a quite different tone. And then this is Seneca writing, I do not agree with those who recommend a stormy life and plunge straight into the breakers, waging a spirited struggle against worldly obstacles every day of their lives. The wise man will put up with these things, not go out of his way to meet them. He will prefer a state of peace to a state of war. Then on 35, grief hits people hard, Seneca says, because they don't anticipate it. And then 36, it is simply logical, Seneca says, to think about some misfortune. I didn't think it would happen to me, especially when one knows that it could happen and one has seen it happen to many others. Why not you? In the case of grief, it is even more illogical, given the inevitability of death for all living things. It has to happen sometime, so why not now? It's irrational to expect one's luck to hold out forever. And then the conclusion of the chapter, we shouldn't just assume that everything will work out as we hope or expect, for it's unlikely to do so. This is an important, if uncomfortable, lesson. So, yeah, in this chapter, obviously reflecting a bunch on Seneca's On Providence, and I think it's a nice sort of balance of both sides, where Seneca's saying you should have almost the attitude to saying, nothing is ever truly bad. It is just almost trying to shape the way that one thinks about things, and saying, okay, all of these different adversities are just lessons, even to the point of the grief of losing someone shouldn't be something that rules your life. Obviously, it's sad, and one can feel sad about that. I don't think Seneca or any of the Stoics would go as far as to say like you shouldn't feel anything, but it's to have that sort of rule your life from that point forward is basically what Seneca would say is that it's a misunderstanding of the way that nature is ordered. It's beyond one's control to expect that you or loved ones or other people wouldn't die. Not to say that it isn't sad.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of says it to be like the only reason why grief takes a toll on people is because it's not a common occurrence, in a sense that you don't lose your loved ones every single day, you know. I mean, funny, like when I started reading this chapter, we were doing a church, and part of the cell group we're doing, I think it's 1 Peter, but the ideas in that book are also about how, as Christian, we react to bad things happening to us, and it's like just because we got children, does that mean then nothing bad ever happens to us, you know? But you know, the lesson from it was also exactly the same as this, to be like, first of all, again, like this says, look at every situation as a lesson, you know, like look at it to be like, what can I learn from this situation, you know, regardless of how bad it may look, but there is a lesson from it, and it's then how you tend to take that lesson going forward. Because if you find yourself in a certain position, you try your utmost best not to ever find yourself in that position ever again, you know, if you look at it in that way. But yeah, it's just knowing, and I think it's knowing that it's inevitable not to go through adversity, but in that same breath to be like, as much as it is not, you know, there can be good from it. You know, there's something you can learn from it. There's something positive that can come out of it. You know, as Christians, we always say, like, God knows who we are, and He can never put us through something that we can't handle, you know. And it's interesting how that idea was also in here. And I mean, I remember once speaking to someone, I almost want to say it's my friend Dean, he moved to Scotland. It was about how when you pray about something, let's say, I want to be patient, then you find yourself in situations that will trigger your impatience, you know. So we just have to be very aware, and it's not always that, you know, it's just the same as that whole thing of where you're like, I want, let's say, these shoes, and all of a sudden you start seeing those shoes everywhere. It's just our brains are weird, you know. We tend to seek out things that we've actually said to be, you know. So we should know that those challenges will come along, especially if they're there to help us grow. You know, we will find ourselves in those positions, you know, and then again look at it as, this is a stepping stone for me either to retract to who I, because I mean, for instance, if you say you want to be patient and you're finding like you kind of be like, okay, I can't do this anymore, and you continue being an impatient person, or you take a comfort to be like, okay, this is actually what I wanted. How do I then do with it going forward? You know.
I think a lot of the lessons in Stoicism, I think, tie to various different Christian lessons as well. And it's also interesting because, I mean, if you think about, I think it was Seneca. So Seneca was alive. I might be wrong. Yeah, no, I think it is Seneca. That he was alive around the time of Jesus as well. So he was in the, I don't know if it was around 30 AD that he was born, or that he died or something.
He was alive. I think the kind of there's a reference to be like, oh, he was alive before any of like the scriptures were written, type of thing. The books of the Bible. There was some statement that was around that to be like he kind of
maybe the New Testament, because
he kind of he kind of lived through Jesus's time, so like none of that kind of is incorporated because I don't know if you can, somewhere it was like that was a new religion at the time, or kind of it was being brought,
yeah, Christianity was new then. And but I think regardless though, Paul, I mean, I'm not a theologian and I don't really know that much about this stuff, but seemingly Paul was also quite influenced by Stoic tradition and just general Greek Hellenistic thought, and a lot of his interactions, and even in some of his letters, there were discussions about that stuff. I think we even came across that in previous books as well. But the point, I think, is that there's a lot of overlap and a lot of helpful things to apply.
Yeah, one thing I want to say is in both the way I kind of see the overlap in both, like that's the Bible and like Stoicism or whatever, like Christianity and like the main goal is to be a better human being. That's like everything that you sort of get out of it is to make you a better human being. So I think that overlap that's why we tend to see that overlap, because I mean that's kind of the core fundamental of Christianity at the end of the day, to be Christ-like, which is, like a better human being, better citizen of society. And it's the same with this. It's like the lessons are to make you better. The lessons are, yes, it's an adversity, but it's how you react to it. The things that you don't have control over, but your judgment. And it's like when the judgment results into a terrible emotion, then they're like, please don't make that often. Like, I mean, that's, again, I know we're probably the most we talked about the Bible. Deviated or spoken about the Bible and the book, but it's like, in the Bible, anger is not good. There's nowhere in the Bible that says that anger is something good. And this is saying the same thing, that if your judgment leads you to anger, like, just know that's not good. And like, yes, it will take time to start, but the end goal is like, when you react, try as much as possible that you don't get, angry. It's the same thing as if you see someone angry, that shouldn't make you angry, It's them, Yeah, it could be maybe you're a result of it. Then you should try maybe find a way to mitigate it, but not then go to be like, why are you angry? Then you also get annoyed by it. That's just not right.
Yeah. I mean, I think in general I agree with what you've said. I will add two small caveats. There is the idea of like sort of righteous anger, which I don't think should be completely neglected. But even if it's like sort of jumping back and forth between Christianity and Stoicism, I think it's Marcus Aurelius or it's Seneca talks about the idea of, even in terms of that kind of anger towards a good thing, it's still better to take pause and act righteously and courageously, rather than just acting out of sheer or basically just reacting. One shouldn't do that. And then the whole, I think one of the ways which Stoicism and Christianity also relate is, so it is about that good character. I agree with that, but also there's the relation to God, which one wants to be in right relationship with God is the central sort of Christianity idea. And then Stoicism would be one wants to live in accordance with nature, which, yeah. Anyway, now on to our place in nature. I tied in better than I thought it was gonna. And now for the ad. No, joking. Okay, so page 40. So this is digging into our place in nature. He says, where Epictetus turned his attention inwards to focus on what we can control, Marcus looked outwards to contemplate the vastness of what we cannot. And then on page 43, Stoic nature, conceived as an intelligent organism, is governed according to fate. Then further down, for Stoics such as Marcus, accepting the reality of fate, or causal determinism, is essential. It is not just that some things are out of our control, it is that they couldn't be any other way. Given various causes at play at that moment, then further down, our actions can and do make a difference. They themselves can be the causes at play that contribute to the outcome of events. As one ancient source put it, fate works through us. We ourselves are contributors to fate and the parts of the larger natural world governed by it. But that doesn't change the fact that when an event happens, given the various causes at play, the outcome could not have been otherwise. And then further down, once we grasp that something was inevitable, we shall see that bemoaning it is pointless. It will only generate further distress and simply displays a failure to grasp the way that the world works. Then on page 45, whether nature is providentially ordered for our benefit or not, as Seneca claimed, Marcus thinks that grasping that there is at least some kind of order and reason for what happens can help us to cope with whatever comes our way. Yeah, I think that's the round off of that chapter. But basically that the Stoics believed that the world is well ordered and things will play out in a certain way. And it's not that we have zero control over what's going on, but we do play our part in this in the world. But to think we have more control than we do is mistaken, and accepting that fact is very helpful in living a life that you can just enjoy, rather than being stressed and worried. So yeah.
I'll kind of say again, I need to get better at marking things. But I'll say something which I'm sure is in the book somewhere, but but it was kind of there was a point where they spoke about how our judgments elicit certain emotions and stuff like that, and it was kind of the whole. And remember, those it was kind of to be like, no, that we shouldn't sort of. I know I'm butchering this, but it was more of we should control our emotions rather. Like it was around that, we should be very vigilant, like our judgments and what emotions they sort of elicit and stuff. But then it was which it kind of also made it seem like all emotions are the same, and then there was a whole thing of, I think, like it doesn't mean that you shouldn't love. Like I don't know if you remember, there was a section like that.
Yeah.
And, it then kind of tied it into be like with now the whole nature aspect, and it reminds me in, I think, the first chapters, like being in harmony with nature is what's good for the soul. And it kind of then also had to be like something like love is also seen in nature, and by that to be like how animals also care for their offsprings.
Yes,
we just have to accept that that's more of a natural phenomenon. Yes, it is an emotion, but it is a natural phenomenon, and that's part of balance. Yeah. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I think it also ties back to the community thing as well later on, where the family is the innermost circle almost, or it's us, then the one further out
Community,
concentric circle is family.
Yeah.
All right, should we go on to the next chapter, Life and Death? A nice chilled one. Okay, so page 48, he says here, in his essay on the shortness of life, Seneca says that for many of us, by the time we are really ready to start living our lives are almost over. It's not that our lives are too short. The problem is that we waste so much time. We procrastinate, pursue things of little or no value, or wander aimlessly through life with no clear focus. In so doing, wasting the greater part of our lives. Then further on page 49. So what is the remedy? How does Seneca think we can take control of our lives and live them to the full? First of all, we should stop worrying about what others think. Don't try and impress others. Don't pursue their favor in order to secure some advantage. It is absurd, Seneca suggests, that someone might be so protective of their money and possessions and yet so freely give away their far more valuable time. And then jumping to page 52. What does Seneca think we ought to do? He quickly dismisses the playing of games and sports, as well as popular holiday activities of what he calls cooking one's body in the sun, which I found a very funny thing because I didn't know that sun tanning was a thing back then as well. So, like I was saying, he quickly dismisses the playing of games and sports, as well as the popular holiday activity of what he calls cooking one's body in the sun. Indeed, he attacks many of the things that are often referred to today as leisure activities. Instead, he recommends philosophy as the finest, most worthy activity, by which he means thinking, learning, reading history and literature, reflecting on the past and the present. This is the opposite of rushing around in the pursuit of worldly success, which, he says, is won at the cost of life. Further down, we like to think that humanity has moved on and hopefully improved over the past 2,000 years, but Seneca shows us that many of the issues that people grapple with today are no different from those that preoccupied the inhabitants of imperial Rome. And then page 53, I think, touches a little bit on what you said. Everything that we have and that we love is merely on loan. Nothing can be kept forever, not least because we will not be here forever. It is tempting to present this tragic, bittersweet truth about human existence, or as a tragic, bittersweet truth about human existence. But Epictetus himself is far more blunt about it. You are a fool to want your children, wife, or friends to be immortal. It calls for powers beyond you and gifts that are not yours or yours to give. And then lastly, in all this, Epictetus's goal is to reduce our anxiety about death and to soothe our grief at the loss of loved ones. But just like Seneca, he also wants us to appreciate the life that we have. Your life does not belong to you. It could be taken away at any moment. So enjoy it while it lasts. Yeah, I mean, death and life are never going to be simple topics, and they touch on quite a few things there, but I think one of the key ones is the one that has been repeated a few times, but the idea of wasting one's life and pursuing things like money and wealth. And it's not that Stoics would say it's a terrible thing to pursue. It's just that to pursue it in excess is a bad idea, and you are doing it at the cost of life. And then it does touch on that thing you brought up sort of quite a while back, which is he recommends philosophy as the finest, most worthy activity, which he means thinking, learning, reading history, literature, reflecting on the past and present. And yeah, I think there's elements of that are true, and there's elements of it that's a little bit extreme. But I kind of find it interesting that sometimes you'll talk to some people and they really enjoy thinking about those kind of things, about like virtue and history and what other people have thought through, and and then other people just don't want to talk about it at all. It's almost like a difficult thing to talk about, and would rather just sort of, I don't know, do something, cook themselves in the sun. And I think it's not a terrible thing to do, to be able to relax, because sometimes the people who like to pursue the philosophical stuff, they kind of almost can't live a normal life because of that. They almost go too far to the other extreme, where I personally think one should be able to just be able to go to the beach and actually enjoy relaxing there. If you can't do that, I think there's something, an idea of, I think it's Aristotle's golden mean, there's something off in where your sort of priorities are. They're too far shifted to the one side. But at the same time, if you can't enjoy sort of thinking about what it means to be a good, virtuous person, there's possibly something also slightly off the golden mean there.
I think for me, from this chapter, again, like you said, the whole, like you pointed, the whole how to live life, reading philosophy, history and whatnot, they're like something that the poets need to ponder upon. But what also caught my attention in this chapter was the whole that people only start living life when it's a little too late. I think I, for one, am in that, I want to say era, but then as it sounds a little cheesy. But yes, I'm in that period of my life where I'm like, I just want to live life, like experience all that I have to experience, because I feel like for so long I was also like, everything had to be very calculated. Like, is this decision good or bad? And not saying that I'm like off now making all the bad decisions in life. No, but it's like, if it's not harmful, or very like against my morals or anything, then I can give it a chance, like in that sense. There's no reasons having what if questions when things were at the palm of your hands, if you can do it, so I am really for that it doesn't need to take something, and I mean, he kind of said like it takes people going through something tragic, and for people that haven't gone through that, it's very hard for them to actually start living. But I think you just have to be very cautious and mindful to be like, listen, I have one life, and it's either I live it now or never, because every moment we essentially wasting, like we never taking it back, You know, all you do is, you know, later in life when you're on your last legs, be like, but I could have done that. You know, don't rob
Yeah.
yourself, you know, that experience just for the sake of, you know, I'll do it later. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm such a procrastinator, you know, and I think I felt like that was speaking to me, and to be like, you know, there are times when you just have to get up and do it, you know. I mean, yes, the
Mm.
other thing, I mean, it's always interesting when, you know, I think back to, I think it was 4,000 weeks where we're, yeah, and I'll probably, I think every time we discuss in books, it will always make its way in there somehow. But it's the whole thing
That's a
of
good
how
book.
procrastination is a fear of failure. You know, like the day that I kind of like made that, because always you're just like, oh, I'm a procrastinator, yeah. Like, you know, and you
Mm.
don't kind of see, I mean, you know, it's bad, but you just don't know how bad it actually is. And I
Yeah.
think that was one book that made me realize, like, okay, that's actually maybe also true for myself, because the times when like I procrastinate the hardest is because I'm not, and again, in most cases the outcomes have been good, but it's like I'm just not ready for that outcome, you know. Then,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. We scared of it.
yeah. Mm. So yeah,
Mm.
like, I mean, yeah, we are born, and the one thing that's again inevitable is that we will die, you know. And
Yeah.
yes, I mean, I can confess I fear death. Like, I don't know why, but that's just one thing that, you know, it's not like always constantly thinking, but once in a while it'll come and I'll get like this chill down my spine. Um, but yeah, it's like, you know, what's the remedy of that is that when I'm on
Mm.
those last legs, not be there like there's this that I could have done. You know, I always feel when I'm
Mm.
in that space of me doing things, you know, it's like that is actually that never actually crosses my mind. But you know, when my mind's idle and stuff, you know, again, I think we're throwing in the Bible a lot today. I'll throw it in again at this point, but it's the whole thing of I was there was a day where we discussed John 3, verse 16. It's quite a popular verse. Everyone knows that verse. But there was a shift in how I was taught to think about it. And I was like, okay, that's actually quite interesting. It was to be like, you know, it says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten, that whoever believes shall not perish but have everlasting life. And it's that thing to be like, that life is actually now. You know, that whole glamorous life, as long as we obey God and whatnot, it starts now. We don't have to wait to die to have that life.
Mm.
It's now. It's happening. You know. Yeah, and I mean, when I heard that, it was like, because so often it's like, oh, you're pro, and I think some people take that to the point of like, no, I need to. I'm not saying do all the, but it sort of like restricts them to what they do, and they're always like, oh, so that I live, you know, that life once I die. But it's like, no, like you can have that life now, like, you know,
Mm.
do everything in accordance to God's will, you know, like, you know, that doesn't mean you have to live a miserable life, you know, or a life that
Mm.
restricts you from doing anything. That life is now, you know, so you have to live it, you know. And again, like this book says, it's like that penny always drops very late for most. I'm sure that it doesn't even happen for others, but you know, we
Yeah.
have to stop wasting time. And like it says, people are happy spending money, but wasting time. You know, it's
Yeah.
like, um,
Yeah. At the cost of life.
mm,
Yeah. That's what he says. Um, this is the opposite of rushing around in the pursuit of worldly success, which he says is won at the cost of life. So, yeah, it's a dangerous game. Play it at your own peril.
Yeah, I digress there, but yes, I'm back.
I'm back to. Should we go on to the? Say again.
No, I was saying I digress far off there, but I'm saying now I'm back.
No.
Focus on the
No. I was saying I'm back to, so we could go on to the next chapter. How we live together. Yeah, I'll run through again as usual. Okay, so starting on page 55. The Stoics would also agree with Aristotle when he said that human beings are by nature social and political animals. Page 56. The Stoic turn inwards, as we have already seen, is primarily focused on cultivating good, virtuous character traits and avoiding harmful antisocial emotions such as anger. The whole point of this is that afterwards, we turn back outwards to play our part as more effective members of the various communities in which we are necessarily a part. Further down, if we want to live a good life, we need to be good human beings. That means embracing our nature as rational and social beings, but it also means living up to our various roles that we find ourselves in and accepting responsibilities that come with them. Further, page 58, Stoic ethics, a little bit further up, Heracles outlined in his treatise on Stoic ethics the idea that we are each at the center of a series of expanding circles of concern, starting with ourselves, then containing our immediate family, then our local community, and eventually ending with the larger circle that embraces all humankind. And then page 62. It is very difficult to try and break free from old habits or destructive patterns of behavior if we are surrounded by other people still living that way. As Epictetus put it, if you brush up against someone covered in soot, you are going to get covered in soot yourself. And then on page 63, in Rome, committed Stoics were prepared to face up to tyrants rather than compromise their principles. In so doing, they embodied the virtues of courage and justice. Far from counseling political passivity, Stoicism encourages us to live up to the very highest standards of political action. So, I think that what I find interesting about that is, so obviously, the idea that we are in a community, and that community can be thought of and expanded into broader and broader circles that eventually encompass the whole of humanity. And I think that's a helpful idea, and it sort of gives us a guide to how we should act, and if things happen that are in conflict, where one person is in conflict with another, obviously we should try and neutralize the situation. But if we can't, then we are our inner circle, and then expanding outwards, that's where our priority should be. So that's one part of it. But at the end of the day, the Stoics would say I would have thought before I read this book that Stoicism and Stoics would want to try and pull back from politics. But actually it seems like the Stoics want to, as mentioned sort of towards the beginning of the podcast, Stoics actually aim to be involved in politics, because if one truly does have a virtuous character, then one of the ways that they can put that character to good use is by being involved with those kind of matters. And then in this chapter we didn't dig into it too much, but it touches on the point that even some Stoics to the point of death, where defending certain principles and that, they would do it to the point where if say for example the emperor was doing something wrong, they would push back against that, and some of them even died for doing that, and sort of trying to have it so that the, I guess, politicians, as we might call them now, or anyone in political power, doesn't compromise their virtues or their character. And yeah, I guess sort of a little bit of a ramble, but it's an interesting idea. And maybe a last comment is with the theme of tying the Bible in. So one part Marcus talks about branches on a tree and a branch being cut off from a tree. So maybe I'll just read it. A branch cut off from a tree, or a branch cut off from its neighboring branch, is necessarily cut away from the whole tree. In the same way, a human being severed from just one other human being has dropped from a whole community. Now the branch is cut off by someone else, but a man separates himself from his neighbor by his own hatred or rejection, not realizing that he has thereby severed himself from the wider society of fellow citizens. So, and then with the Bible's idea is we are all part of one body. So that kind of same principle of community, and we all serve our different functions. And to sever the hand or to sever a branch from a tree is it's a more serious thing than one might think. And where for a tree, someone else is doing the action of cutting off the branch, the tree isn't doing that action. But with humans, we are the ones that sever our own arms in the metaphorical sense, by hatred or rejection. And yeah, I think it's definitely something worthwhile thinking about, because we can quite easily have rifts with other people, not realizing just how much damage it can do. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, for me, the only other thing to add from that is just, I think I pointed it out before and you read through it about how difficult it can be trying to break old habits or destructive patterns, when we still live around people that are doing those things. And I mean, the example there to be like, if you brush up against someone covered in soot, you're going to be covered in soot yourself, it just goes back to us paying attention to our judgments. I feel like that's an extension of that, to be like, yes, I've decided to do this, and I have to be aware, that whatever I do, or my judgments kind of preserve the decision I've made. But yeah, I mean, it's also interesting to be like in that same breath. And again, that's also now comes to be that in as an individual, and then it's very different though. But the view is different to now, like you're saying about the whole branch thing. To be like, it's like that's out of now your own hatred. It's now that emotion part. If you're acting out of emotion and you cut off someone, then you're actually cutting yourself from society. That it's like, at first glance you might think no, but it's the same person. But no, it's one, you're controlling your judgment, the other is the result of your emotion. It brings about that separation again. To be like, if your emotions are not in unison with everyone else, you would say, I'm actually cutting these people, but in actual sense, you're being cut off from the society, from the community. I think that's also, and I think I'm actually struggling with that right now, to be like, and again, I feel like you have to prepare yourself in that sense to be like, I don't belong in that community. But if you're doing to be like, no, I'm still in this community, but that it's like you have to, at the end of the day, surround yourself with people with the same values as you are. It
Yeah.
kind of says that, it's unfortunate that there are certain things that you can't control. Like, I mean, for instance, what gender you're born, what race you're born, what country you're born in. Those are beyond your control. But there are things within that you are able to control who you keep, the company you keep around you. You are able to, that is under your control, and it's how well, and again, who you keep around is based on you judging their character to be like, is this someone I can have around me, or is this someone I can't? And that's also, people need to be aware that you need to, and it's a running joke. I don't know, I've spoken a lot about this week, but it's like, who am I keeping at my table? That's my weird thing for 2025, to be like, who am I keeping at my table? Like, I keep joking with people to be like, hey, unfortunately, you're not making 2025, like, and it sounds like I'm joking, but there's actually some truth to it, to be like, yeah, nah, and again, I think this is all coming from me moving here. I've met a lot of people, but at the same time, it's like, not everyone has to continue being in my life. You have to make that decision, and it's not like I'm being mean or anything, but it's also been like, being aware, again, like it goes back, being like, no, man, I don't like that about myself anymore. And like, if those people enjoy doing that, you're like, okay, it's just again, the same thing of, I don't want rubbing shoulders with someone with suit on them, because then that suit will be on me. And again, it's on me at the end of the day. So it's just being mindful, being...
I think it is being wise. And one can also go too far and reject people that they shouldn't reject, and all kinds of things. And it's also a balance of understanding yourself and where you are vulnerable and not. Because it's also, there are people with stronger characters than you, not you specifically, you in the general sense. There are people with stronger characters than you, and so should they therefore not spend time with you? Where obviously you want them to spend time with you so that you can learn and grow from them, and there's lots of different sort of things that point towards that being a good idea, having the idea of a mentor and that. And so obviously it's not something where if someone isn't perfectly aligned with exactly how you do things and stuff, you should therefore just cast them out. There is sort of a wisdom there for saying when it is a good idea and when it's a bad idea. An example might be like the classic example with the soot thing is smoking. Like, if you want to quit smoking and you're hanging around with smokers, you are not going to be able to quit smoking. Or you have very close to a 0% chance of quitting smoking. I would guess that's not a statistical fact. I do not know the facts. But it's going to be very difficult, right? And the same with alcohol. If you're going to... Yeah. It's going to be difficult if you want to stop drinking alcohol, but you keep on going to clubs because that's what people do at clubs. And so I think there's wisdom there, but just because you've quit smoking doesn't mean you should never hang around with, say, for example, a family member that smokes. It's just that when they go out to smoke, be like, hey, look, I really am sorry, I'm not gonna, because I will, it's a weak point for me. And possibly even for a time, say for a month or two, it might actually be the wise thing to step away completely from that family member, because it's really difficult to stop smoking. And so, and And another one is, it's interesting. Apparently, like if you are overweight and you spend time around people that are healthy, you become healthy. And vice versa. And it's kind of obvious because we are communal people, and we want to. It's almost, as the Stoics would say, it's according to our nature that we want to act socially, and sometimes, most of the time, that's a very good thing, but sometimes it can be a bad thing. It's like if you go to your friend's house and you see that they have a bigger TV, and then you want a bigger TV. This is totally not a thing that is real in my life. So yeah, we all have our vices, and we need to be wise in how we deal with them. Yeah. Should we go to the epilogue?
Yeah.
Right. So page 65. Many of the ideas that we have considered are neatly summed up in the passage by Seneca in a letter of consolation he sent to his mother. He writes, "It was nature's intention that there should be no need of great equipment for a good life. Every individual can make himself happy. External goods are of trivial importance and without much influence in either direction. Prosperity does not elevate the sage, and adversity does not depress him, for he has always made the effort to rely as much as possible on himself and to derive all delight from within himself." And that's it. And yeah, it's written in a little bit of a different way, but I think the essence is that, like, we often think we need material goods in order to be happy, and things basically, but actually it's the inner citadel, it's the inner virtue that we should be cultivating so that we can view things well, and we can understand them rightly in accordance to nature, as the Stoics would say. And therefore, we can be happy. Not because we've all of a sudden run into a bunch of money, or a relationship turned out the way that we wanted it, or any of those, again, as the Stoics would say, preferred indifference. It's not to say that they're terrible, but they aren't the thing that makes them. They aren't intrinsically good or bad. It is the one who has a virtuous character that brings out the goodness or the badness in those things. You can have a relationship and it can be horrible, or you can have a relationship and it can be great. And generally speaking, it's going to be two virtuous people, or at least people that are more virtuous than abusers or something like that, that have a good relationship. And the people who have a distorted character, they are going to struggle. Yeah. Any closing thoughts from your side, Peter?
No, nothing much. I think much has been said. I don't think I have any more. Just the usual. If you can, read the book. Like we joked last week, the book is short enough that you'd probably read it in the span that we've been discussing it.
Yeah, why are you listening to the podcast and not reading the book? That's
but listen,
if there's anything
that the book.
there's anything that anyone has learned from our podcast, that should be it. Just read the book rather.
But yeah, it's I mean, I've even recommended it to a friend. I think it's
nice.
It wouldn't have come at a better time. I think for myself as well. I think there's just a few things I'm grappling around, and like reading this book was actually insightful and enlightening. yeah, I really enjoyed it. I really learned a lot. I'll probably read through it again. I'm actually thinking maybe 1 year when I'm crazy, I would do the 1 week Stoic challenge, because apparently there's a 1 week
Oh,
Stoic
yes.
challenge.
What's
So
it,
yeah, maybe someday.
modernstoicism.com or something like that?
I don't know. I didn't, but I know it was mentioned in one of the last chapter. I think in the epilogue or something about
Yeah.
So maybe someday. But he kind of even, I don't know if it's betting people to be like, people that do the 1 week, you'd benefit. People that do the 1 month, even greater benefit. So we'll see how I feel when the time comes. But yeah, maybe that's something I could challenge other people to do. So yeah.
Yeah, I
for
think
you?
it's. I think from my side, I've really enjoyed the book. I really like these kind of short, concise books that touch on a bunch of the key themes. I think I said to you before we started, I really enjoyed getting to learn more about Stoicism, because it's something
Yeah.
I've wanted to do for a while, but haven't really done too much of, aside from watching YouTube videos and that, which normally they just go in one ear and out the other. But it's been really good to because we read in previous podcasts, we discussed the Enchiridion, or the handbook by Epictetus, and the letters to a Stoic, or from a Stoic or something, by Seneca, and then reading through a book like this, and then where he touches on those, and as we often say, like sort of seeing the same things from a different lens, and just reminding us of those things. And I think, yeah, it's been very helpful, unsurprisingly, because like Marcus and them would say, you need to reflect on it, and continue to go back to your judgments about things, and say, is this good or bad, and refine that. And I think these kind of books help with that. So it's been great. Would recommend.
Yeah. I think the also other thing about this was just that the languages were better than the first two books we read.
Yeah.
So I think that was also something that was good about it.
We have hopes in the pipeline of making the language easier.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is. I think that is one of the difficult challenges with those older books, is just the way that the language is structured. And I'm sure that there are really good translations of it, but and the ones we read weren't terrible. It's just that if you don't read that kind of literature as your norm, it's a bit of a difficult pill to swallow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Peter. Yeah, it was a good 2024, and as the Stoics would say, God willing, we'll see you in 2025.